உலகெங்கும் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் TVI.
Good afternoon, dear viewers. Welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm your host, Parthe Kandaval. Last week, with the start of the school year, we looked at parenting with a focus on, are we over-programming our children? This week, we'll examine another issue affecting families across Ontario as we settle into our routines, the situation between the teachers' unions and the provincial government. In the last part of today's show, we'll discuss the situation and the results of the election held for the Eastern Province Council in Sri Lanka. On Tuesday, the Ontario Legislature passed Bill 115 with support of the Liberals and the PCs. This bill freezes teachers' wages, bans strikes for 2 years, and ends their ability to bank sick days. In response, teachers have protested and have said they will not participate in extracurricular activities like running clubs and coaching teams, which form a core and essential part of the high school learning experience. Labor strife with the teachers' unions is not new to Ontario. Many of us can remember the strikes in the mid-90s under the Mike Harris government. I certainly do, and I was in school at the time. Though, as students, we may have enjoyed the time off, it is a serious issue that certainly affects most of us. To debate this issue, we have Paul Balking, a member of the OSSTF, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, bargaining unit, and a candidate for a PhD in education at York University. Branavi Mailvanganam, a high school teacher in the TDSB and from the provincial government. And from the provincial government, we have Liberal MPP Sue Wong of Scarborough Agincourt. She is also a former TDSB school trustee. We invited the PC party and the NDP, but they couldn't send anyone. As always, please call us at 416-623-8100 to ask your questions and share your thoughts and concerns on this important topic. Good afternoon and welcome to CrossRoads. So we'll start off the discussion with why this legislation, Bill 115.
Well, as all of you know, the issue before the government is the financial challenges, okay? We recognize the fact that we have $13 billion deficit in Ontario, and we are held responsible in terms of the responsibility of maintaining our budget. That's the first piece. We also want to protect all the gains we have made for the last 9 years, from smaller class size, full-day kindergartens, and the support network in terms of the education piece, because it is in our values and our principle as a government supporting public education. So we are very, very mindful that at the end of the day, 85% of education dollar is going towards salaries and compensations. So 85% of the salaries and compensation, that whatever money we put into education, a good proportion of that money is towards salary and compensation. We have to address that. We are also very concerned about the fact that the program's rollout of full-day kindergarten continue to roll out as scheduled. And we're also concerned about the fact that there are unsustainable liability to the school board and to the province, such as the gratuity piece, okay, the sick day piece, okay? And in this new legislation, and a lot of people not talking about it, is protecting the younger teachers, okay? We have significant number of younger teachers are not moving to the grids and not being hired, okay? And we're the first government actually addressed that, as you know, that the Bill 115 is ensuring that the retired teachers, the maximum days of coming back is 50 days only. And we're also very concerned about fair practice of hiring, okay? And prior to this legislation, that there's inconsistency of hiring practices, okay? So they're not transparent, they're not consistent, and people don't know what the hiring practice is. So now, across the board, the process must be public, must be transparent, and we need to address that, because I hear every day, even this morning when I was at a...
So when negotiations started initially with the
It started in
teachers-
February.
in
It started in
February.
February this year, okay? And you know, as late as August, I was talking to some of my former colleagues at the school board. They weren't talking, okay? And so we need to be respectfully, we do support negotiations, and we have some negotiated contract, the MOU.
Did the government feel the
Yeah.
banning strikes and this legislation, back to work legislation, was necessary?
Those are difficult conversation, Parthy, as you know, okay? We still believe in collective agreements, okay? I certainly do, okay? Individually, as an MPP, as you mentioned earlier in the introduction, I was a former school board trustee for the TDSB. But having said that, if you're not at the table, Parthy, you can't negotiate, okay? As mid-August, I was talking to some of my colleagues at TDSB, okay? How can you negotiate when you don't have on the table? So, but we have the OECTA, the Ontario Elementary School Catholic Association have, the Francophone School Board have, and some of the professional students have. So this is a conversation, and it will continue, not just after the passage of the bill this past Tuesday, the conversation continue. I'm glad that you're hosting this topic today.
Okay. Paul, and your response to Bill 115?
Okay. Well, I'm a civics and history teacher, and as such, I'm fairly familiar with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is the first part of the Canadian Constitution, and many would say perhaps one of the most important parts of the Constitution. And of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the initial section details our fundamental freedoms, which are things like freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and freedom of association. Freedom of association is a clause which especially embraces the rights to be a member of a labor union. One of the most important aspects of being a member of a labor union and for unions to be able to function effectively is the right to free collective bargaining, which means that both sides, the employers and the workers' side represented by the union, have the ability to negotiate a collective agreement. What Bill 115 does is it takes away our ability to do that. Because one thing which I have not seen emphasized by the government and by many of their press releases and statements to the public is that one of the most important aspects of Bill 115 is that it allows the Minister of Education and the Provincial Cabinet to essentially veto a collective agreement reached between a bargaining unit of a teachers' union and a school board, and even give the power of the Minister of Education to essentially rewrite that collective agreement along their interests. And so that completely nullifies our ability to actually function in collective bargaining, and therefore I believe a key part of our ability to actually function as a trade union. As you said, it also functionally eliminates our right to strike for at least 2, possibly more years, because the Minister of Education can preemptively rule a strike as illegal, which is also unprecedented.
Okay, Paul, going back, as you mentioned, negotiations started in February.
Yeah.
So what broke down from your end, or the OSSTF perspective? What went wrong for the government to legislate in this last week, this legislative back to work?
Back in February, what happened was the normal collective bargaining occurs between a bargaining unit of a teachers' union and a school board. This time around, as in the previous time 4 years ago, the provincial government came to all the education unions a proposal that they do so at the provincial level, and we ostensibly resolve the money issues, the wages and salaries and so forth, and pension issues there, and we went along with that. What happened next, the provincial government's opening proposals around cutting our sick days in half from 20 to 10 a year. The freeze was viewed as a very aggressive proposal from the Ministry of Education, and we brought our counter proposals forward, saying that we recognize the financial situation of the government in terms of the deficit and so on, and saying that we would agree to a wage and salary freeze for 2 years, as long as movement up the grid was preserved for the teachers with less than 10 years of seniority. We also offered, the union offered to basically take over the liability for our long-term disability plan, which would have saved the government millions of dollars in terms of liability issues on their books by moving it off their books onto ours. That offer was rejected.
Some of the teachers unions, like the Ontario English Catholic School Teachers Federation, have agreed to a deal with the provincial government. Why is it? What are the ETFO and the OSSTF looking for that they didn't find in the negotiations?
Okay, well, there's 2 things here, I think. One is the original negotiations and the substance of it, and the issues around the wage freeze and the cuts of sick days and so on. The other issue, I think, is how it's evolved since then with Bill 115, which eliminates our right to collective bargaining. When I go into schools, the thing that really makes teachers upset is we've lost our ability to effectively negotiate. The wage freeze does make people unhappy, for sure. It makes me unhappy personally. But the big issue, the really unprecedented issue, is loss of these basic collective bargaining rights. That's unprecedented legally.
Sue, on that topic, the teachers have said they're not going to go to strike.
Yeah.
So then why the need to legislate them back to work?
Well, that's not true, okay? We have heard a threat of strike, okay? There were votes, okay? We are very concerned about instability in the classrooms across all families across Ontario. The other piece, I just want to go back to what Paul's comment on this fact is, if the government or the ministry revoke any kind of a collective bargain, it's because it's not meeting the fiscal parameters, okay? I want to be very clear for the viewers, okay? Because any kind of agreement, there was opportunity for negotiation. It was clearly written out. You read the budget book when the government released the budget paper in February, in March, and what have you. That book clearly spelled out that the collective agreement must be re-signed by August the 31st, okay? So if anybody who said it wasn't transparent, wasn't stated, it's clearly stated when Minister Duncan released the budget for 2012-2013, said very clearly all collective agreement for teachers must be signed up by August 31st, 2012, okay? Failure to do that will result in legislation. That's very clear English, okay? But if the government or the minister is challenging the negotiation, is because the fiscal parameter is not met. We are extremely concerned the fact that we cannot not protect the gains we've made in terms of students' learning outcome, the full-day kindergarten, because 2012, 2013, full-day kindergarten rolling out would generate 1,100 new teacher hire, okay? The other piece is that we are also very concerned about the fact that, despite this tough economic times, okay, our government is still building new schools, okay? We haven't fired any teachers, okay? And the fact of the matter here is we are all in this together, okay? We will disagree, but at the end of the day, we are whole responsible for the financial challenges, okay? It's easy to be a critic in this difficult time. When you're in government, you have to be held responsible for the financial piece because we cannot allow next generation.
Okay, let's examine that topic of the province's finances. Brannaby, since 2003, teacher salaries have risen 25%. And what the government is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that because of economic uncertainty, a freeze has to be put in place. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that first of all, when the government saying the teachers have to take that freeze and education workers have to take that freeze, it kind of holds us responsible for the deficit. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that to begin with. But on the other side of it, I am prepared to be a team player and do my part and take that freeze. Granted that, somewhere down the line that is made up, because as a fairly new teacher, that freeze impacts my life significantly. Because when I'm not making an income to support the things that I need to do in my everyday life, it makes it hard for me to go into work and be able to do the job that I'm being paid to do.
So on that topic, why the education sector?
No, we're actually doing across the board, okay? You probably heard in the news, we're dealing with the doctors right now, okay? We're dealing with nurses as well, okay? We're doing public sectors, okay? So the teacher is just one first because their contracts expire August 31st. Right now we're negotiating with the doctors, okay? They're coming back to the table. With regard to younger teacher, I want to be very clear to the viewers, okay? The younger teacher will be moving up the grids, okay? Because of this, as part of the Bill 115. The grids will be going up if you're a younger teacher less than 10 years, okay? The grid reflection of the education as well as qualification. That's really critical, okay? The fact of the matter here is that significant young teacher will not be frozen from the grid just because they're new teachers. The Bill 115, not just about the grid movement for younger teachers, also about the sick day. Because younger teachers in the past, when they're on maternity leave, will not be getting support. This particular Bill 115, younger teachers who are on maternity will be supported, okay? And the other piece that we're also very, very mindful about is the fact we hear about concerns about the right to strike, negotiations piece. There's a significant part of Bill 115 that there's not a lot of noise or spoken about is the fair hiring practices, okay, and younger teachers in terms of opportunities, all right. And the other piece here is the fact that how do we ensure protecting public education? You don't have to go far. Look at what happened in Chicago. Okay, they shut down the entire system. Okay, look at what happened to fiscal and challenges overseas in Europe, in Greece, in Spain, and elsewhere. Okay, we still have a very robust, protected public education, and I'm constantly reminded by my constituents, because I work with young people, continue to work with young people, and I am concerned about their well-being, not just about right now. I'm looking at the long term, because when you have a $13 billion deficit and you're not addressing
On that issue of the long term, I had a friend on Friday say to me, in the public education field, teachers have job security, at least those who are contract, right? And in comparison to the challenges and uncertainties those in the private sector, and mind you, this friend is a business manager in a private company, and then the uncertainties they face, they see this as unjust and unfair. That there's strong job security in the teaching field, but yet what the unions are asking for is an increase in salary.
I don't think we're asking for an increase in salary. I think we're asking that we keep the salary that we already make.
In accordance with the cost of the annual inflation, the cost of living, which in 2011 was 3%. And so with minus any kind of cost of increase, our salary effectively goes down. And it also should be noted that part of the OECTA, the agreement with the Catholic Teachers Union, is that all teachers take unpaid days off a year, which amounts to a pay cut of 1.5% a year. So even though the OECTA agreement would preserve that movement of the grid for younger teachers, a substantial part of that money would be diminished from that 1.5% cut as well. And also, I would take some issue with some things you said, so long in terms of about staffing levels and so forth, and that cuts to public education, which were in part of the provincial budget, which were then pushed down to the school boards, had the impact on the Toronto District School Board in the cuts to hundreds of positions. In the Toronto District School Board, 200 secondary teaching positions were cut. Some of those were due to declining enrollment, but at least 80 of those were basically cut because of budget cuts, which means that schools not necessarily having a librarian, issues like that. It also saw cuts to positions, for example, like hall monitors, like secretaries, other support staff positions, education assistants, across the board. So I take issue with that.
And given the importance of all these roles and the importance of having a holistic education experience for our students and children, why the threat or why the action to cut coaching teams and running clubs as a response to this legislation?
Because that is a volunteer service on part of teachers. I mean, nowhere in our contract does it say that we have to go in and volunteer our time, like after school, before school, lunchtime. That is of our own doing.
It's an expected.
It's an expected, but it's
job
not. It's not
duty. But a lot of parents look for in terms of creating opportunity for their children.
And I understand that, because I was a student in high school as well when the last strike happened, and it affected me deeply. But I never took that on the part of teachers to be doing something to diminish the student experience. I see them as protecting their livelihood and their what they do, to raise awareness that what they do is important, and a lot of it is outside of the classroom, which is not part of our contract.
So is it right for the public to expect teachers to provide what they say are volunteer?
Well, what I'm hearing in the community, Parthy, is the fact that we have very, very dedicated, hardworking teachers, okay? I also heard some of them are not taking this out in the community. I also know some of the teachers are purposely not doing the extracurricular just on Monday. The rest of the week they do an extracurricular, okay? What we have and the Premier have said is that this is an adult conversation. We need to do everything we can to support the students and the learning, okay? Because much of the extracurricular, we all have been a student once in our system, okay? I certainly have benefit from the extracurricular, okay? But at the end of the day, that when we talk about this bill, we're talking about how to preserve and continue to protect public education, okay? The extracurricular stuff many of our students see as an extension of the classroom, okay? In terms of music classroom, then they be part of the band, or they do a sports, they have a team play, the cross-country teams and what have you. But the key piece here is that it's a concern for the government, but we really want to encourage everybody to participate.
All right. It's time for a short break. Please rejoin us on this important issue. Welcome back, viewers. In our studio today, we're discussing education and the situation between the provincial government and the teachers' unions. If you have any questions or you're a parent that is affected by any of what's happening, please call us in 416-623-8100. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Sue, the Progressive Conservatives are calling for an across-the-board public sector wage freeze. Why, if the question is economic uncertainty, the deficit, and our economic times, why not across the board? And some will argue that it's fair. We're not just targeting the teachers' unions.
Well, we are addressing the public sector across the board, okay? But the recommendation from the Drummond report does not recommend across the freeze in terms of salaries, okay? What we are also looking at is that the conversation right now with respect to Bill 115 is just dealing with the education sector. We are looking at public service sectors, okay? We are in discussion right now, and you heard I said earlier about the doctors, okay? There are other sectors within the public sector we're looking at, okay? We're looking into nurses as well. So across the board, we are looking at it, but the recommendation from the German report does not advocate for a public sector freeze across the board, okay? And in terms of the sectors with education, we are also very mindful of the fact that the conversation right now with the Bill 115, mainly on the salaries and the gratuities and the benefit stuff, we also as a system, just back to Paul's comment earlier, that school boards got an increase, okay? 2%, okay? There's 3 ministries across Ontario that's got an increase. Education, Minister Broughton, Minister of Health Long-Term Care, Minister Matthews, and Training College and University, Minister Murray, okay? So any other ministry, there's no increases, okay? How that get translated and operationalized is done by local school board. So if there's any concerns about how that over $2.8 billion with the TDSB funding, that needs to be accounted by the TDSB, okay? So when we give them money, it's based on student enrollment, and the fact of the matter is we do have a declining enrollment. We continue to fund with an increase, because normally when you have a decline in enrollment, you should have decreases, okay? So how that get operationalized, and how many teachers in the classroom, what kind of the management team, that's the TDSB. We have conversation, just so you know, Paul, about that issue.
In your response?
Okay, well, first of all, we're in the midst of a global economic recession. That's the reason that Ontario has a deficit. Businesses are not turning over as much cash as they were prior to 2007, and so as a result, tax revenues are substantially down. It's not because public sector employees are being paid extraordinary amounts of money. In fact, the per capita spending on public services in Ontario is actually lower than any other province or territory. So that's the reason I believe we have this situation deficit. And one of the biggest problems with the reason why the recession is continuing on so much is there's a lack of demand. People aren't going out to restaurants, people aren't buying clothes, people aren't buying new cars and so on. And when we talk about wage freezes, that just makes the situation worse, because it leads into declining income people can spend on services. It's the middle class which drives our economy. Teachers are a big part of the middle class, so are nurses. And by cutting our incomes, that means that we are not able to spend as much, and that's going to.
The point was made that there's a declining enrollment, right? So as a result, the funding that's allocated to a board is decreased, right?
Right.
And that in turn affects the negotiations and what's available.
But funding has decreased disproportionately more than the enrollment has declined in the Toronto School Board at the secondary level. And I'd also point out too that enrollment is increasing somewhat in the earlier levels of the the earlier grades in the elementary level as my
That's
generation having
perfect.
kids and they're entering the system?
It's because of full-day kindergarten, okay? So because of full-day kindergarten, right now we're building, okay? I mean, in this tough economic time, Paul, you got to appreciate. I know in Scarborough, we're building a brand new elementary school, okay? Previously, when there's a tough economic time with Ray and Harris, teachers were laid off, okay? Things were closed, okay? We're building new school, okay? We're giving the TDSB significant capital money. Of course, if we have more, we will give, okay? The fact of the matter here in Scarborough Rouge River, they're gonna get a brand new school of over $13 million, okay? So, yes, this is a tough economic time. I'm not saying it's easy, okay? But we're all in it together. Not just the teachers, ourselves as MPP.
But what I see across the board, I see schools losing librarians. I see schools losing education assistants. I see them losing custodians. That's what I see across the system.
Paul earlier brought up the concept of the middle class, right?
Yeah.
And earlier this week, QP president Fred Hunt, he said, why don't they stand up, probably referring to the provincial government, why don't they stand up to the bankers on Bay Street and get them to pay their fair share in taxes?
We are. I mean, the fact of the matter
Why not
here
that
is
strategy? Instead of reductions in education, an increase in corporate tax rate.
See, at the end of the day, we are very, very concerned across the board, okay? Part piece that we have ability to manage and oversee is the public sector, okay? We have negotiated this budget was a difficult one with the NDP, as you can imagine. The fact that we have changed some of the funding in terms of daycare, okay? But with regard to the private sector piece, this is what I'm hearing you saying is the fact that why not attacking the bankers, what have you. They are paying a fair share, okay? With regard to the harmonization of the taxes, we are also generating opportunity for small business to come to Ontario, okay? And that's a good thing, okay?
But one thing is that it was reported a couple weeks ago that the cumulative third quarter profits of the 5 big Canadian banks was $7.8 billion. That's an extraordinary sum of cash. Mark Carney, the Governor of Bank of Canada, reported that big Canadian businesses are sitting on something in the range of $560 billion of cash, which they're not investing.
We'll come back. I wanted to build on the point of how the earlier this year, the Ontario budget was supported with the NDP. Unfortunately, the NDP, we invited them, they couldn't come. Where does the NDP and the unions differ on the education issue? Or because that's a big criticism of how the NDP, who are looking to become a government, where do they differ on the unions?
Okay, well, first of all, I could say that the unions, we are an independent organization. We're not a
no, certainly, but
party,
on the issue of on Bill 115 and negotiations between the teachers' unions and the government,
where do we?
Is there any significant difference?
Well, as we know, the NDP voted against Bill 115, and they gave their reasons for that. That it was a violation of the basic principles of collective bargaining, and that a deal could have been reached. And in the past, 4 years ago, the last round of collective bargaining in the Toronto School Board, it took us about 8 months, I believe it was, from the expiration of the last collective agreement to reach a new contract. So, as Sue alluded to, when Dwight Duncan sets down in the budget that we want agreements signed by this state, it doesn't work that way in the real world. And also because our pay stubs, on our pay stubs says the TDSB, not the Ministry of Education. So they are our direct employer. They're the ones we need to negotiate with. So
Brady, question. How are your high school students reacting to what's happening and to the, lack of extracurriculars?
A lot of them are very nervous, especially our graduating class, because the last year of high school is the most significant for a lot of students. They're looking forward to prom, they're looking forward to grad trips. So many of them at our school, we haven't shut down extracurricular activities. We've decided that if you want to withdraw your services, then you may, but if you want to continue them, we continue providing them. So some students are going around, they're asking teachers for, if they're willing to support their extracurricular activities, and depending on the response they get, they're going ahead with this. Some students are choosing to manage their own activities. So I think students are struggling, and I think that as time passes, they are going to get more and more agitated. But I think right now they're doing the best that they can to sort of support their teachers, because I think they do understand our stance on it. But at the same time, I think they're also frustrated, as they should be.
And as a teacher who isn't as active in the union, do you feel that the union does the best job in representing your concerns
I think the
as a
union
teacher?
is doing a fantastic job.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I am new to teaching.
Uh-huh.
I'm still learning my way around it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that they are doing a fantastic job of because especially my district,
Uh-huh.
because they've had to deal with the layoffs from last year as well
Okay.
as the contract negotiations. So I think they're doing a great job. I do think that I would like to see a little bit more direction from the union as opposed to what teachers should be doing in school,
Okay.
like whether it should be, all across the board withdrawing our services or
Mm-hmm.
shall it remain voluntary? Because I think there are many teachers who are in that in-between stage of, whether they're 0.5 contracts or if they're LTOs, and you might not, you're trying to put your name out there, you're trying to get principals to notice you, and you don't want to do anything that, after this is all over, you don't want anyone, like, I mean,
Okay.
in theory, principals should not be,
All right.
Counting someone as not as a team
as
player
not as
or
a team
something.
player, but at the same time, you want to support your union.
All right, changing course on the topic of education. Does the provincial government have any changes in mind for education reform to make our education stronger, smarter, more innovative?
Well, I think we're staying the course, okay?
Okay.
There is a discussion paper right now going on with post-secondary, okay?
Okay.
Minister Murray is rolling out the post-secondary education discussion right now.
Okay.
We want to have the
How about elementary and
elementary, we're
secondary?
staying the course in terms of the full-day kindergarten. We're here to stay.
Okay.
We'll continue to move on that piece. There is a conversation right now dealing with diagnostic testing, okay? Because this is important. There's some inconsistency. We want to be a balanced piece. We want teachers to be part of the conversation, diagnostic testing. The other piece is that we want to support young teachers, okay? I can't stress enough. Every day I'm in engagement with young students and as well as young teacher, and I'm always very mindful.
That's a concern that's come up in our community
All
quite
the time,
often,
all
is
the
young
time.
teachers being able to an
Absolutely.
opportunity. And
That's
what's-
what our government is talking about. Okay,
Okay.
for the first time, we're reducing the number of days where a retired teacher can come back. Okay, in the old days was 95, now down to 50, which is the right thing to do. Okay,
Okay.
I still hear constituents say, "Why not zero?" I said that's not on the conversation right now. The other piece is that we also want to make sure that when we hire new teachers, that we must be fair, transparent, and accountable, because we have inconsistency, because we fund 4 publicly funded school board, and it's hit and miss, okay?
All right.
And I just want to go back to the conversation you asked Paul earlier about the NDP and OSSTF. This is the same party didn't vote for the budget after we negotiate with them, okay? So let's be very clear, okay? You cannot negotiate and then not vote, okay? Yes, you have a freedom when you sit at the House not to vote. Abstain of vote is not acceptable, because the public expect us, when you negotiate a deal, you either vote yes or you vote no. But abstaining from voting, that's not the right thing to do.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this topic on education. Please join us after the break. We'll be discussing with Mr. Vijay Vijayendra and Mr. Thangavelu regarding the outcome of the Eastern Province Council elections. Welcome back, dear viewers. Last week, on September 8th, the Eastern Province of Sri Lanka, which includes Trincomalee, Ampare, Batticaloa, had their provincial council election. It was a very important election for our people, not only in the Eastern Province, but island-wide. To discuss the significance of this outcome, we are joined with R.K. Guruparan, a law lecturer at the University of Jaffna, who's joining us through the phone, and Mr. Veera Vijayendra and Mr. Thangavelu. Mr. Veera Vijayendra is the Secretary of the TNA Canada, and Mr. Thangavelu is the President of the TNA Canada, as well as the President of the Tamil Creative Writers Association. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for making time to come on this important issue. To give our viewers the context, what was the outcome of the election in the Eastern Province?
The elections were held on September 8th. So the ruling party, they had 12 seats. Then
The ruling party, the UPFA.
UPFA has 12 seats. Then the Tamil National Alliance had 11 seats. UMP had 4 seats, and Sri Lanka Muslim Congress, they had 7 seats.
Okay.
So altogether, and also the NNF, which is called the National Freedom Front, they contested in Trincomalee, and they got 1 seat.
Okay.
So this is the results of the.
What is the significance of these numbers to our community?
The numbers is no party by itself can form the government.
Okay.
Because to form the government you need 19 seats. That is out of the total of 37. So that right now the UPFA, that's the ruling party, they have 14 seats plus one, the NNF, so is 15. The National Alliance has 11, Muslim Congress has 7, and UNP has 4. The UNP, for this part, they had decided to support the TNA in case the TNA form a government. They are decided to support the TNA on some certain conditions. So right now, as today, the latest news is that both the TNA and the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress have met to discuss the possibility of forming a government.
All right. To give further context to this issue, were these free and fair elections?
No, I will have to readily tell you that it's not a free and fair election, and also we have to admit the fact that it's unlike the past years. We pretty much lost the voters in Eastern Province, so we were reduced to 1/3, as well as the Muslims are 1/3, and Sinhalese also they grew up to 1/3. So we didn't expect a lot of vote to form a government by ourselves. So the TNA wouldn't have made the government because we needed 19 seats. So the 19 means 19 minus 2, 17 seats, which we wouldn't have achieved. However, our expectation was that fairly reasonably, if there was no trouble and no misgiving by the government party, our party would have achieved 14 seats. Then they would have got 2 more 16 seats that we didn't get. So in that respect, we have to tell you that, and also the information we received from there that there were vote rigging as well as some the changing of votes and rejection of too many votes in order to make the Pullian the highest number of voted guy. So given all that, we had to simply tell that this election, the government has robbed the election from the Tamil people.
Okay, Guru Paran, are you there? Guru?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm here.
you were, if I understand correctly, were you in the Eastern Province in the lead up to the election? Were you in?
I was.
Okay, what were the dynamics of the election, and also what is the significance of this outcome?
So I signed up for a civil society memo that was released on the 28th of July, way ahead of the elections, after the TNA decided to contest in the elections. Now we highlighted the fact that the provincial council system was not the system that Tamil people thought was engaging with in the past, particularly in 1989 and 2008 when elections were held for provincial councils. In 1989 was not provincial council, and the provincial councils were still merged in 2008. It was after the councils were remerged and the Eastern was completely captured by the Sri Lankan government forces. He also said that this election would be forced upon the Tamil people.
Okay.
And that TNA should have been careful about deciding 18 ways to contest elections. We were not saying that TNA should not have contested the election, but we said, on one hand, people wanted to vote and show their anger against the king. And that is a very legitimate expectation that people have to be given that opportunity. On the other hand, we have the problem of TNA's participation in the Eastern Provincial Council election being interpreted as acceptance of the Provincial Council system, and more particularly of its other north and east. So what we did was to call upon the TNA to put out a manifesto and to ask for a mandate from the people, asking them to endorse the TNA stance that they are not for a solution based on the provincial council system, and to vote for and to also again give a mandate to the TNA.
And how did they respond?
That they are for
How did that civil society memo?
No, unfortunately, despite releasing manifestos in past elections, including for local government elections in August 2011, the TNA did not put out the election manifesto. And
Okay.
then people and observers here tell us that, it was largely because we insisted that a manifesto on these lines be released.
Okay.
During the campaign, there were many sort of there was a lot of wavering. I mean, there was some talk about TNA suggesting that the provincial councils were not enough, but that we need to show our engagement with it, so on and so forth. But what I thought was a big strategic blunder on the part of the TNA was to convert this election into a referendum of sorts on whether that the whole election result, the contrary support from the international community for further power sharing depended on the outcome of the election.
Guru, we'll get a response. Guru, can you hear me? Okay, so what Guru Paran was saying is that there was a request put for the TNA to create a manifesto saying to actually reject the provincial council setup and seek something greater. Why was that not?
You see, that is not the stand of the TNA.
Okay.
The stand of the TNA is, we had to engage ourselves in any elections that is held in the north and east.
Okay.
We can't boycott the elections.
Okay. I don't think he was asking for boycott, but to use it as a referendum on the rejection of the PC model.
We issued a manifesto during the 2010 parliamentary elections.
Okay.
We have issued a manifesto even during the Pradesh Sabha elections. So there was no need for another manifesto for the provincial elections.
Okay.
What we are told is that we are prepared to, in fact, you are trying to take over power in the eastern province because we are in a majority. The Tamils are in a majority. They have 40% of the voters are Tamils. Next is the Muslims, and the next is only the Sinhalese. So we were trying to form the government, but we know because we are 40%, we can get an overall majority. But we were certain that we will get about 15 or 16, as he said, and then with the help of UNP, we could have formed the government.
Okay, Guru?
Yeah.
What's happening right now post-election? It's a hung council, so what's happening right now?
No, just to complete what I was saying, Bharti, and then to come to your question.
Okay, yeah.
So, I thought, given the dynamics of the Eastern province, now I don't agree with your respondent, I don't know who you are on your panel, but I don't agree with your respondent that, we need to participate in any election that comes our way. We need to handle elections in one way of doing politics, not the only way of doing politics. Tamil politics will not be elections driven. I'm not saying that we should have boycotted that, definitely one of the Tamil politics. We actually did ask the people to vote, but we said, put forward a clear manifesto. That's the argument that there was a manifesto in the past, because then why you may have a manifesto for the local government elections. So anyway, let me just stress on this point that we have to be very careful about the kind of international dynamics that is played out, which wants us to situate our political demands in and around the independence.
Okay.
I think it's dangerous. I don't want to go into the constitutional technique.
Yeah.
Independent of doesn't actually deliver on the kind of aspirations of the Tamil people, even the very fundamental ones. Let me just say what the outcome is. Now, there are negotiations between the SLMC and the TNA.
Yeah.
There are just reports coming in that, that the Actima News reported today that the SLMC has come to a decision to support the UTFA.
But
there's some news today that they have again the
But given the SLMP's,
I thought it was very bothersome on the part of the
given the SLMC's support of the ruling party, is there any opportunity for the TNA to make a partnership with the SLMC?
No, if there is a possibility, you see, my stance is very fundamental, Party. You need to think of what really you can achieve through forming a government on the ground, but since you've got into the mode of participating in the elections, of course, it is good to try whether you can form a government with the SLMC. So what I'm worried about is this talk about an all-party government, and Mr. Samanathan yesterday at the press conference here saying that they are willing to look at the option of an all-party government. Now whether that actually happens or not, the fact that Mr. Samanathan has come out and said that indicated that they are willing to flirt with this idea of an all-party or sometimes what is known as a national government, because I think it is indicative of the kind of politics that TNA wants us to take.
Okay, Guru, I'll pause you right there. And what's the response to that? That's indicative of
the people have spoken. They are given a very clear mandate to the TNA by electing about 11 members, and they have got about 90% of the Tamil voters, so they voted for the TNA. So the TNA will decide. On its own day, it can't form a government. So it is asking for the support of the SLMC, which is quite fair.
Okay.
And even for the national government, which he was referring to,
okay.
we will decide. The basic problem is, these are power centers. The local government, the provincial council, the municipal council, the presidential. So we had to take control.
But can that trust be developed, Mr. Vijayendra? Given the SLMC, the Muslim Party's support of the ruling party in various issues, and including governance, can there be trust being built between the TNA and the Muslim Party?
No, when you come to politics and in this fragile situation, there is no such thing as we can go by a thing called trust or anything. It is simply power sharing, and we have to go along with that situation. We have to get the power in our hand and then run the government, and there will be problems and there will be solutions. We have to work it out. We can never trust even SLMC, or we can even trust the singlist parties, but we have no option. But we have to coexist with them.
Yeah.
Guruparan, what's your response to that idea of coexistence?
Actually, the votes for SLMC as well as the TNA is anti-government votes.
Okay.
You see, so these two parties won the elections on a
Can we say
platform.
it's anti-government when the SLMC has supported the ruling at the national level?
No, in the elections, in the provincial council,
They contested differently.
They contested differently.
But
And they asked the government and asked the Muslim people to vote against the government and vote for the SLMC.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. In the future, we'd love to hear your concerns and comments about an important issue facing our people back in Sri Lanka. Thank you, dear viewers, for watching TVI's CrossRoads. That's it for this week. I'm your host, Parthi Kandaval. Have yourself a good week.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.